is that, Donald, you are the largest builder on the lower end of Manhattan. And for that, you are respected. Deal maker, comeback artist, you know how to put packages together. But there's no development on the uptown side of the same island between the same two rivers connected by the same bridges. And the fundamental question is, what are the impediments and what incentives are required to expand the development? Or to put it another way, a woman flying 10 miles high looking down, and you saw a vast area of green, call it the downtown side of the Central Park, and the vast area of brown, but the brown or scorched area was not sand, it was topsoil. Logically, you would figure out a way to irrigate, to extend the green, because if the brown is not irrigated, when it's parched and the wind blows, it will encroach upon the green. So we have to extend the green. But so far, we've chosen to build walls between the green and the brown rather than to extend it. So in the context of this family of friends who in a real sense are looking for how to make an urban development policy real, and you are a premier developer, what impediments are there between you and developing on the other side of Central Park, and what incentives would you require to make that happen?
Well, thank you, Jesse. First of all, it's a great honor to be here with you tonight. I think maybe before we discuss impediments, I do want to say this, and I think this is very positive. It really is happening uptown. It's starting to happen. Percy, who's been a friend of mine for a long time, has done such an incredible job, both physically with money and also psychologically on really showing what can be done. And I just want to thank Percy because he was borough president. He was borough president when I was doing the Commodore Hotel, and I couldn't have done it without him. And he's just a great guy, and I love to see you, Percy. You look better than you did 20 years ago, I have to tell you. So you're doing something right. But it is happening in Uptown. And I have friends that, in this particular case, one white, looking for property in Harlem, wants to develop property in Harlem. And this is something that wasn't happening 3 years ago or 2 years ago or 10 years ago. It just wasn't happening. And, you know, sadly, one of the reasons is that it's very, very difficult to get land in other locations of Manhattan. And that's a sad reason to necessarily be going to other locations.
You said land is an impediment on the uptown side of the
well,
side.
No, land is very hard to get anywhere in Manhattan right now. And people are going to Harlem because they really see it as a new place to invest. I'm talking about the real estate developers and some very good ones in New York. And I think you're going to see a big renaissance. I think you're already seeing it. And it really was led to a large extent with what some of the work that Percy and others have done. But I think you're going to see a renaissance, and it has begun, but it's continuing in Harlem and in the uptown, as you call it.
The reason I press this case is that in spite of the accolades that Percy Sutton deserves after being borough president 12 years, he had to go to 63 banks to borrow the money to buy WLIB. This question of capital. John Johnson said to me 2 days ago, the esteemed publisher of Johnson Publishing Company, for 20 years he could not borrow any money. He had to use subscriptions to sustain the financing. So a fundamental question, while there may be some persons here and there, what is needed to break the impeding forces to pursue greenlining the red line zone on the uptown side of Central Park?
Well, I just want to preface the 63 banks. I mean, I wouldn't say the banks are exactly in love with me after what I did to those suckers. I mean, you know. So, Percy, I think that you're probably doing better. I think I might have had to go to more than 63 banks. there are things that can be done, and some are being done, I don't think to the same extent. If you look, I have an honor of having Jesse at 40 Wall Street. We call it the Trump Building at 40. This is now a 72-story building right on Wall Street, right opposite the New York Stock Exchange. And he's a very tough negotiator when it came to rent, I want to tell you that. This man is definitely setting a new standard for paying low rent. But it's an honor. This is the toughest negotiator I've ever had.
It's called mixed rent.
That's right. I said, come on, Jess, you got to give me something. He said, nothing. I said, all right, what the hell? So he's tough. But the fact is that building was built with incentives, because the downtown, as we call it, the downtown market in Lower Manhattan has been given massive tax incentives for regrowth and rebirth, and it's really paid off. I mean, tremendous amounts of construction are taking place. I think that one of the things that you could do is go to the city and ask, and I really think it's important, ask for massive tax abatements for things that would be built in certain sections where you'd most like to see developed. And I will tell you that residential abatements and commercial abatements have a tremendous impact on construction. And I mean, I know all the taxes, and I know all the tax rules, laws, and changes, and I will say that the 421 program is the same program on Fifth Avenue and 57th Street, which is Trump Tower, as it is for Harlem. And Harlem needs more help than does Fifth Avenue and 57th Street. So I think one of the things, and really the biggest thing in terms of an economic incentive, is real estate tax abatements at a large level and larger than other sections of the city.
Utendahl, you are a manager of money, have lots of, these are your roots. What's your response to Trump's assessment of either impediments and the need for incentives?
Well, I would agree that that would surely help. I think that right now, I think it's an interesting time when I'm finding financial marketplace is my business. I
asked the question of the wrong guy. How do your business requires a growth market?
Well, I guess, business is a game, and we all like to play the game. And in terms of playing the game well, growth is nice, but sometimes there's something nice about sitting back and enjoying what you've done also. I could use a little bit of that.
You're already over the mountaintop, Don. You don't fit this. No, I think that the real point here is that these markets that Urban keep relating to, these markets are growing. You mentioned that there were some factors relative to the need for tax abatement. You gave me the clear impression that there are incentives on one end of Manhattan, the not on the other end. Is that true?
Well, there are incentives on all ends of Manhattan, but certain areas of Manhattan need greater incentives than others. So that 57th...
That is a very nice way to put that, though.
Yeah. 57th Street and Fifth Avenue doesn't need the same incentive as 125th Street or other areas in the city. And yet the abatement program is pretty uniform throughout the city, which would seem to put areas that need the help in a great disadvantage.
Now, John, that goes to the heart of the question of a development formula, because if everything is seen as equal and it's not equal, it amounts to ham and egg justice. It sounds even and smells even and even blends, except whenever you put the hog and the chicken on the table, the hog always votes against it, and the chicken votes for it, because the chicken just drops an egg, and the chicken drops an egg and moves on. The hog has to drop a leg and can't go out of the deficit with growth, not with tax breaks. I think we grew our way out of this situation. Now, and I am rather convinced, and Charlie, you are the mere challengers, that the private sector must take the leadership, and the government will follow it in rebuilding urban America. That's my premise.
I truly believe that it has to be the partnership. The private sector is going to look at the balance sheet. There's no social services on their agenda. They respond to stockholders. But there's no reason why the government cannot provide those incentives to make those investments more lucrative in the areas in which we want to direct our fiscal
Assuming there
policy.
must be a private government partnership, who will assume the leadership to make it happen?
You know, it really takes people that have the courage of a Donald Trump to know that people like Trump are not going to be intimidated. That people like Trump can decide what they think is good for America and have enough self-confidence that they're going to make it. And people like Trump will know that if the green part of Harlem and East Harlem and Washington Heights was to find itself going anywhere near Trump Tower, he'd have a problem. The idea is to have Trump's presence throughout this island and the Trumps throughout this country to provide the leadership in saying, I am not involved in social services, but if you want me here the same way you're inviting me to go to South Africa, show me how I can make money, because wherever it is, I can be successful. And that also means that the Trumps are going to ask, if we come up there, what will the school system produce? What would the health system produce? What will the crime situation be? Can I make that dollar, or do I become a social scientist? And then the mayors come forward and say, we want to be your partner. We know that we can't do your job as well as you can, but we can make it easier to promise you that you will have a labor market second to none if you decide to come to our town. And that's what the empowerment zone's all about. But it is a grain of sand on the beach to talk about empowerment zones when, as the mayor said, we don't even have an urban policy.
Well, Charlie, let me cut this another way before you probably got Donald on the spot here.
No.
The reason why I'm trying to keep
That'll be the day.
Donald and his group on the spot is because when I was growing up in Greenville, South Carolina, one time there was two drunks on the railroad track drinking wine. Having big fun, the more they drank, the better they felt. When they got really in the twilight zone, one said to the other, I believe I'll buy this railroad track. Others said, don't think I want to sell it, have a drink on me. Now, Charlie, until the man or the woman who owns the railroad and the train is at the table, they just talking trash. Whether they drunk or sober, they just talking trash. It seems to me that what's missing in this equation is that those who stand to gain if there's development along the track, and lose if there's danger in the curve on the track, that they are absent in this equation. It seems that we feel the absence of Wall Street, as it were, in this equation to extend the profit zone. I'm not convinced that the guy whose strength comes from recycling his district and keeps getting reelected perpetually has an interest in developing Harlem or Denver or Chicago. On the other hand, I'm convinced that developers do. And developers have the interest in standing to get the most gain, then why can we expect of them, Donald, to take some lead, even in convening their governmental allies, to create a formula for you that makes it a profitable proposition? Why can't we expect that of you?
Well, I think we can expect it of government, and I think to a certain extent government does that. Jesse, I think they've done it in downtown Manhattan. I think they've done it in midtown Manhattan. I think they've done it to a lesser extent in the uptown sections of Manhattan.
Much lesser. And the point, we keep driving this, of course, obviously, is not to embarrass you, but to bring out something that's missing. There's something missing here, Charlie. It seems to me there's a formula factor, because after all, there's no race gap, but there is an investment gap that's quantifiable. There's a trade deficit that's quantifiable. There's an imbalance of trade that's quantifiable. There is a less investment in the schools. That's obvious and quantifiable. What can we do, Mr. Rangel or Ed, what can we do to close the quantifiable gap that keeps the playing field tilted?
You know, I take liberties with Donald Trump because when he sees government not doing what they should be doing, he has no problem of going in there, whether it's a skating rink or whatever, and getting it done and taking credit for it, and it goes unchallenged. But who better than a business person can complain when they pay high taxes in our cities and find out that it costs $85,000 to keep a kid at Rikers Island and $7,000 to keep him in school? At some point, our business people are going to say that they're not getting a return on their investment. It could very well be that as we see the booming industry, that prisons are forming in every major capital throughout the United States of America, where state legislators are fighting for their prison the way many of us fought for our military bases, whether there was a need for it or not, that until the business community comes together and recognizes that America cannot move forward as an international leader any further than the number of people that are being educated or the number of people who look alike that come from the same community that are being incarcerated. And this cannot be ignored when those numbers are growing.
But Charles, you kind of symbolize, before we throw this open for a little while, and then we're going to have a reception, if you will. Welcome, Reverend Chopper. Is this. There is now about to be a bailout of South Korea. South Korea has 1.2 million car drivers, and they are exporting 2 million. So obviously, they plan to export their way out of that hole. We sell 8,000 cars a year to South Korea. And yet our business leadership has taken to a less literate and smaller population infrastructure investment in roads, sewers, bridges, plants, indeed pension fund monies. And now we plan to bail out a corrupt, unaccountable, political, economic family, and we speak of without reservations. It may be $20 to $50 billion, but we kind of got to do it. I just did not hear those kind of monies for a bigger, closer, safer market. What's missing?
They have no investment to protect here. The protection of Korea has nothing to do with love and affection for the Korean people. It's to protect the investment they have in Korea and in Asia. And if we can get them to include us as a part of their family, then collectively we would be protecting each other. Wouldn't you think, Donald?
Well, Charlie, before we open up, because the reason I'm going to drive this is because we cannot be irresponsible isolationists and say ignore Korea. That would be ridiculous. That's not the point. The point is that if we look at the people in this room as a market, not just as a domesticated group of captives, but as a market, that the incentives, it seems, to invest in this market, whatever they are there must be here, whatever they are there, because this market has more people, more money, more trained people, more MBAs, more accessible, and we'll pay a price if we don't do it. Who do we look to make that much sense? in this redirection of the investment to green line the red line zone so we can all be in the black, since we're all in the red, green, black.
Well, to be the devil's advocate, I would say that you have a problem, Reverend Jackson, because there's $1 trillion involved in the prison industry in keeping people in jail. That is an industry that has support of the health industry, the clothing industry, the food industry, the service industry, the construction industry, the political families, and state legislators. And we find those African Americans and other minorities that were able to dodge the pitfalls of drug, alcoholism, and miseducation, they are buying. So that consumer market is there for them. And the question has to be weighed in losing the market of the people who are underemployed, unemployed, or incarcerated. Are they really making up for this with our police department, our judges, our court system? There are billions of dollars being made locking up people. Now, I'm not saying that that's the moral way to look at it, but we're talking about markets and who's making money. And I can tell you that if you were to listen to the debates in state legislators, it was, didn't you get your prison 2 years ago? It's time for me to get mine.
Urban, what can be done to shift the incentives to creative building and the urban policy that Mayor Wellington talked about, knowing your industrial allies as you do? What can be done to shift the incentives from Charlotte's reality to the reality that we like to think of as being the dream? Then we're open to questions and start jotting your little notes down and ask some questions. We're going to take about 30 minutes of Q&A, and then Drew Hill going to do the so forth.
We're back to me, though, right?
Back to you.
For starters, I took Donald's growth, so we're in good shape for the next 10 years. And I think there is reason for optimism. And I guess I would, since you're going to go to the questions afterwards. We have a country that the demographics of our country going forward, I think, will create enormous opportunity. We are in the middle of a technological revolution in which this country's method of democracy and capitalism is rated by a huge distance any other country in the world. Our unemployment is at historical lows, obviously not low enough. For the 3% who aren't employed, that's not a good statistic. But what it means is that we have a growing economy in this country. What it means is that we have enormous growth. We have need for excellent people in the workplace, and we are going to have to re-educate and find unique and new ways to go into that workplace and retrain and bring people in. In Minneapolis, where our headquarters are, we have one of the lowest unemployment rates in America. We happen to also have a very large presence in Denver, and we have the same issues there. It is hard for us to be competitive and find people to come to work for us. And so we are forced by economic requirements and by demographics to find new ways to get people to want to work for us. Simple things like casual day, which if you'd asked anybody in our industry 5 years ago, New York Stock Exchange now has casual day. I mean, people come and leave by. So, I mean, these sound foolish, but the fact is that everybody is looking for ways to compete, and people want African Americans, Asian Americans, Latinos in their workforce. They will not survive.
Charlotte's point is that we have the growth, the wealth, and the prosperity at the most radical polarization since 1929. So that the growth, the wealth, and prosperity is extremely horizontal, vertical, and far less horizontal. And Charlotte's saying that there's a segment of people. I saw Reverend Sharpton, who was here running the campaign not long ago, arguing that unemployment.
How do we convince the Donald Trumps of this world that we're willing to form a partnership, we're there to work with you, and this can become profitable? Because if that center had been built and had succeeded, which I believe it would have, we would have changed the whole identity of Harlem. However, we don't have a government that's willing to support us. So how do we form the partnership, I guess is the question.
Which government is that, Charlotte? City, state, or local?
Let me make it clear that Harlem Trade Center concept was formed by former Mayor Dinkins and former Governor Mario Cuomo. And it was abundantly clear when Giuliani